What is going on, my friends? It is another very cold -6-degree day, and we're here talking about steels. So let's get to it. Alright, how's everybody doing? Thanks for tuning in. So, today we're going to be going through my top 5 blade steels for EDC. We're going to talk a lot about chemistry, composition, properties, and a lot of this information has been provided by Dr. Laren Thomas in his knife engineering book. Highly recommend this book if you haven't checked it out already. And Dr. Laren Thomas is the proprietor of Knife Steel Nerds, so check out his articles on his website. I'll link it below. Great information in this book. Alright, so before we talk about steel number 5, I just want to say that, of course, heat treat and blade geometry, edge geometry, are super important. So a lot of these properties can sometimes vary depending on how the knives are made. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind. Alright. Number 5, first steel we're going to talk about is CPM S30V. This is my Benchmade 940. Benchmade uses a lot of S30V. Are you going to focus on me? There we go. Benchmade uses a lot of S30V. I also have my custom bug out in S30V. Now this one is going to be a little bit slicier than the 940 because the 940 is a little bit thick behind the edge, and the bug out is quite a bit thinner, and it's got that full flat grind. S30V is great because it's one of those really well-balanced steels. So it's got pretty good edge retention. It's not extremely tough, but it's, relatively good. It's actually not terribly hard to sharpen. And, what's great is that it's widely available. I'm not going to say it's cheap, but, a lot of times you can get it for cheaper than some of these other super steels that I'm going to talk about. And it's just, you can find it everywhere. And so it's a really good steel for that reason, and it's well balanced. Pretty good on the stainlessness. Chromium's around 14%. And if you don't know, chromium is one of the main elements for conferring corrosion resistance to a steel because it forms a chromium oxide layer, which is an inert layer over the steel surface, and so that protects free iron from oxidizing, basically. And so, usually steels above 12% chromium are considered stainless, although it's more of a spectrum than anything. And so, yeah, S30V is pretty good. It's got, decent vanadium content, and we'll talk about vanadium in a little bit here. I'll put here's the composition of this steel on the screen so you can see. But yeah, S30V, really well balanced. Just a good steel, I have a few knives in it. I've got the 940, my bug out, Endura. I also have a Skinner, which is my fixed blade. But yeah, good, well-balanced steel. Not afraid to get out there and work with it. Number 2 on the list is M390, or as I like to say, the M390 family, also including CTS204P, made by Carpenter. Sorry, 20CV is made by Crucible, and M390 is made by Bowler. And so these are pretty much the same in terms of composition. Heat treat is definitely going to differ, and blade geometry and all that. It's going to differ company to company, knife to knife, but composition-wise, they're about the same. So M390 is really good because it has very high corrosion resistance. So, we're above 18% on the chromium content, and so that's really good because if you live in a ocean environment, I've talked about stainlessness before on the channel. If you live near saltwater, humid environment, M390 is going to be really great. It's also going to have slightly better edge retention than S30V, although the toughness, I've heard varying things, but it's not a super tough steel. It's maybe the same, if not a little bit less than S30. I've heard and seen different things, different amounts of data. But it's not crazy tough. But the improvements over S30V is that it's got better stainlessness and it's better edge retention. But, it's a high-end steel. Definitely, and you see it on all the high-end knives. This Kershaw, they did a run in M390, which is really cool. And then Microtech uses a lot of 204P on most of their stuff. Yeah, so that's pretty much everything I'll say about M390. Another pretty well balanced steel, a little bit more high end than S30V. Alrighty, next up, number 3 on the list is CPM S90V. Now this is a really high alloy steel, stainless steel, and what is really remarkable about this knife, or this steel, is very high edge retention, very high wear resistance. And so if you look at the composition, pop that up, we have a very high vanadium content, you know, more than double that of M390 and S30V. So we're looking about 9%. And so vanadium is one of those elements that forms very, very hard carbides. And so that's really good for giving high wear resistance to the steel as a whole. So that's, you know, that's why S90V has really good edge retention and wear resistance. However, the trade-off is that when you have high vanadium, it's going to also induce carbide formation with chromium. So you're going to have chromium carbides as well. But when you have more chromium forming carbides, there's less chromium in solution to help with corrosion resistance. And for that reason, S90V is a little bit lower on the corrosion resistance scale of these stainless steels. So it's not as resistant as, you know, S30V or M390. And so that's, you know, like we've talked about a million times, that's sometimes a problem. But, you know, with a lot of things with these steels, and you'll see this, it's a trade-off. It's a balancing act, basically. But this is a really great steel nonetheless, and it is still stainless. Extremely high edge retention and, you know, decent toughness. I don't think it's any worse than, you know, S30 or M390. I think it's similar from what I've read. So, yeah, there's that. Another great steel, S90V. Now, what is number 2? We have CPM S45 VN. Now, this is a really cool newer steel from Crucible, and this is sort of an upgrade on S30V. Now, they say it's got improved toughness and improved corrosion resistance, and, you know, slightly less edge retention, you know, but I think it's going to be probably a negligible difference, and from my experience using it, you know, day to day, it's impossible to tell. So, for all intents and purposes, it's an upgraded S30V, and that's why it's so high on my list, because it's also really well balanced. You know, it's a little tougher than your S30V and your M390, and the edge retention is still really good, and it's going to be, you know, better corrosion resistance. So there's more chromium than S30V, and another notable difference is they added some niobium, and niobium also forms very hard carbides, similar to vanadium. So that's a cool addition that helps with the wear resistance and the strength. So, yeah, what else can I say about S45VN? Relatively new. We're seeing it come out more and more now, and I think we're going to see an influx in it in the next couple years. And so Spyderco's new production line, Para 3s and PM2s, are going to be in S45VN, so that's cool to see that. But I'm sure we'll see more testing and data come out as more people use it. But in my experience, it's been awesome. Not super hard to sharpen. Another really good balanced steel. And so I really appreciate that. Okay, so my number 1 favorite, current favorite, blade steel for EDC, CPM-Cruwear. Now this one's definitely an oddball compared to the other ones that I talked about, because this is a high alloy tool steel and is not generally considered stainless. So if you look at the composition, we have 7%, around 7% chromium, so it's not really reaching that 12% mark for full stainlessness. I will say it's more of a mid-range on that spectrum of stainlessness. You know, it's not as low as something like M4 or Rex 45, but, you know, it's definitely something to pay attention to. But the trade-off, oh man, this thing is crazy tough, just crazy tough, and I think that's what makes this so remarkable. And on top of that, you know, the edge retention is not terrible. You know, it's cited as being close to S30V, S35VN. So that's really good because you have really high toughness, which day to day, I personally think is probably the most important. You know, there's a lot of different factors, right? But if I have a knife that's gonna be, you know, dulled by cutting a bunch of boxes or zip ties or whatever, like that's fine. I'll just sharpen it, give it a couple passes on the sharpener, and it'll be back up to a good edge. But if I have a knife that's gonna be, you know, cracked or chipped by cutting zip ties or, you know, running into a staple in a box, that's going to be a significantly bigger problem. And Cruwear is going to be better at avoiding those problems. And for that reason, it's my number one. You know, and with this coated blade, I'm not as worried about it staining. And, you know, as long as I'm not on the beach, I think it's going to be okay from what I read and from my experience. So yeah, not as high on the chromium, not as high on the vanadium, so it's not going to be forming those really high hardness, brittle carbides. So if it has a, you know, finer carbide structure and less carbides, it's going to be tougher because when you have a lot of those bigger brittle carbides, you get a crack in one and then you have a lot of paths for that crack to propagate. But if you have finer structure, you're going to have more grain boundaries and the cracks aren't going to be able to propagate as well. And that's what makes the steel tougher in general. Definitely read about crack propagation and grain size. I think it's a super interesting field of science. And I could go on and on, but I'm not going to. If you want to read more, I'll link some articles in the description. It's super interesting stuff. But basically, Cruwear, super tough, really cool steel. Not as common as some of the other ones that I talked about, but you're starting to see it more. You know, definitely you see it a lot in Spyderco. There's some really cool fixed blade guys out there making cool fixed blades with Cruwear. I think it's a great fixed blade steel. Don't have it in a fixed blade, but you know, we'll see where it goes in the future. So that's my top 5. Real quick, I want to just mention I also really like D2, really good budget steel, not quite as stainless, but has good properties. You know, S35VN, another really good steel similar to S45 and S30. Hoping to get more experience with it, a little bit tougher, not quite as good on the edge retention. And then H1 is really cool. Higher nitrogen content helps even more with stain resistance, and this baby just will not rust. So those are really cool 3 notable mentions. And as far as for the future, I'm really looking to get my hands on some M4, 4V, Rex 45, more really tough tool steels, 10V, really good edge retention. Vanax is another really interesting rare steel, which supposedly is really good edge retention and really good stain resistance, as well as toughness. So I'm curious to see if that comes into the market a little bit more. And then of course K390 is another extremely good steel, and I'm really excited to, you know, look into that soon. So that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for sticking to the end, and I hope you learned something. Please leave your comments and questions below. You know, I'll be happy to talk more about the subject. All right, thanks a lot, stay well, and we'll see you next time.